There we go. Well, I'm really glad to be back, and I really appreciate that George asked me back and was patient. Uh, we were 14 or 15 hours without internet, so or television. I don't know what was worse, but I'm back in up north, and so I'm really happy to talk to you about spring birding. When George asked me to do it, like he said, I was down in Naples, and most of my good bird photographs, or what I thought were appropriate, I have up north, and I have on a different computer than the one I have down in Florida. But then I realized that I had in my camera a memory card based on a project I did last year. I was trying to photograph 100 species of birds, which I was able to do quite nicely. And I thought, well, I can use that as the basis because a lot of my birding was done in the spring months. So what I'm going to try to do today is not only talk about the birds you might see in the next few weeks, or right now, I was out today, so I'll talk about that a little bit, but also places to go, places I went to last year, and places that I've gone to in the past. I've paid particular attention to some of the preserves around Woodridge. You're a little more south than I am. I tend to bird a lot in central DuPage County. So let's just talk about this again. Question is, why spring? Well, any time I think is a good time for birding, but spring's an especially good time. And I think if you're a beginner, it's a good time for you. Birds are migrating. So, let's keep in mind that that can start by the middle of February. I didn't get back, excuse me, I didn't get back to DuPage County until the end of March, and I'd already missed a few things that I maybe would have liked to have seen. But the high points coming up from between now, the first 2 weeks of May, as the weather warms up, more and more birds are going to be migrating through our area. By the middle of June, approximately, the migration is pretty much over, but just a few weeks later, the fall migration is going to begin. So birds are migrating. That's a good reason to bird in the spring. The birds are in breeding plumage, especially the males. There's going to be an illustration of this in the program. They look like the birds in the bird guides. They look like the birds on your apps. They're not as subtle as sometimes as the birds might be in the fall. The trees are not fully leafed out. That depends on weather and climate and things as the climate is changing, trees are leafing out earlier. The birds are still kind of in their ancestral patterns, but all things being equal, you might have an easier time seeing birds up in the trees and in the undergrowth than you would later in the season. And generally the weather's conducive. Like I said, I went out today and it was a little chilly, but it wasn't bad. So spring's a good time to go birding. But I want you to remember this. I quote myself a lot here. Birds have wings and they don't read books. What that means to me is that you're liable to see birds anywhere if you're looking, and see some unexpected things in unexpected places. And I'm going to have a couple examples of that from last spring. I talked about this with the first program I did for the library, but I'd like to repeat it. There's some basics here. Where to go. People always want to know, where should I go? Well, the forest preserves in DuPage County are all pretty good. There's about 26,000 acres of preserves. It's about 13% of the county. And they're all worth exploring. They all have something to offer. A couple of the really good ones that I'm going to talk about are Elson's Hill, which is in Winfield, and McKee's Marsh, which is in the Wheaton, West Chicago area. You go to the DuPage Birding Club's website, there's a whole section where some of the top birding spots are discussed individually. And I've written about a few of them, and other members of the club have written about their favorite sites. But in general, you want to go to areas of mixed habitats. where there's ponds or streams, those are all especially good places to look. The deep woods really aren't all that good most of the time. The birds are a little harder to see. There's fewer species, and there's some historical environmental reasons why the woods in DuPage County really don't have as many birds as you might think a wooded area would have. But that's something. Go to mixed habitats. Yes, the early bird gets the worm, so you want to go out as early in the day as possible. Dusk is also a good time. That being said, these days, getting up at 3:30 in the morning so I can be in the field by sunup really has lost a lot of its appeal. So you're pretty much guaranteed to see some stuff if you get out there, let's say before 10 or 11. You want to dress for the weather, always. Assume your feet will get wet and muddy. If you have binoculars, bring them. I would recommend a size like 735, 7 magnification, 842, 8 times magnification. I was looking at some binoculars online. I'm looking to buy a small pair to take with me when I don't want to take my other binoculars. And I was surprised to find that places that sell binoculars are trying to sell you 10 power and 12 power binoculars for birding. If you're going to bird Lake Michigan, if you're going to bird the seas or the beaches, that's great. But for what we do around here, 735s, 842s are really good. Get a field guide. I'm sure George has a bunch of them in the library. You can check them out. They all have subtle differences. I personally, for a beginner, would recommend a field guide rather than an app. Field guides let you look at not only the bird itself, but related birds. And I just find them very helpful. A notebook's always a good idea to record where you've gone, what you've seen, keep some records. Take water and a snack. I ignored my own advice today, and about 30 minutes down the trail, I really wanted some water. Snacks last me about the first 15 minutes, so but that's good advice. And let someone know where you're going. The preserves in DuPage County are very, very safe. There's not a lot to worry about, but it's a good idea to let people know where you're going and what time you expect to come back, that sort of thing. Well, like I said, I want to talk about birds. I was photographed last year when I was trying to photograph 100 birds and places to go. So here's one of my favorite birds, the dark-eyed junco. It is the original snowbird. People in Florida come down in, say, October, November, and stay to March or April are called by the year-round residents snowbirds. Well, this little snowbird, this little sparrow, nests up around Hudson Bay. So it comes down here end of September, October, and I was seeing them in my yard until last week. They're little sparrows, they're ground birds. Notice they have the pink bill, gray, white underneath. And this one, I had to go all the way in my backyard to photograph it. But it was a very welcoming bird when I came back from Florida last March. And of course, we didn't know how bad the pandemic was going to be. So it's very reassuring to see something that I've been seeing for the last 60 or 65 years. Well, you got to look up sometimes. And when I looked up in my yard one day, I had these migrating over my yard. In fact, I do every year. Sandhill cranes. Now you can go up to McHenry and Lake County, southern Wisconsin, and see these birds nesting. Every once in a while, they'll nest in our, further south in DuPage County. But I've seen thousands, maybe tens of thousands of sandhill cranes, and the majority of them are standing in the driveway in my house here in DuPage County, just looking up. So you look up, you hear something, you'll see these sandhill cranes. And let's not forget the house sparrow. A lot of people very dismissive about the house sparrow, and they have all kinds of cruel things to say about it. And some of the things are deserved, but it's a good bird for, I think, any birder to get to know. a beginner because you can compare things to it. Is it bigger than a sparrow, smaller than a sparrow? This is the male. He has the black little throat piece and white on the side, and he was in breeding plumage. So, he's pretty easy to spot, but get to know this bird very well. The first thing you need to do when trying to find out what something is to figure out what it isn't. And if you can just throw house sparrow, cross that off your list, you're a step ahead. Well, I went to one of my favorite places. It's here in Glen Ellen. It's a nature preserve. They call it Lambert Lake. Like most lakes in Glen Ellen, or actually in DuPage County, it's man-made. It's a giant retention pond. Storm sewers go into it. But it's been a very good place to bird. I think we've seen over 130 species of birds over the years there. It's just south of Roosevelt Road and just a little bit west of Lambert Avenue, or Lambert Road. And I was there several times last spring. I got to, of course, see mallard ducks. Again, it's another bird. I think if you're a beginner, you really want to become familiar with the mallard duck, its size, its shape, its behavior. Yes, I know they're common. I was out today and I saw easily a half a dozen, and I wasn't particularly paying attention. So if you're familiar with the mallard, you can compare other ducks to it. It's what's called a puddle duck. It stays on the water, or a dabbling duck. It stays on the top of the water and kind of tips itself over to eat vegetation. There's a whole other group of ducks called diving ducks out there. I don't think I have any pictures to show you this time around, but again, if you know a mallard, you can compare what you're seeing to a mallard, and very helpful. Another bird I saw at Lambert Lake were these little guys, pied-billed grebes. They're smaller than a mallard. You can see up close, you can see the little ring around their bill. They're wonderful divers. They'll dive underwater, and they seem to stay under 3, 4, 5 minutes. I've watched them go down on a big lake, and when one surfaces, it's usually far away from where I thought it might come up, and it's been underwater a lot longer. Some of these stay around not all year, but stay around and breed in our area too. And of course, the American robin. Again, don't dismiss it. Become very familiar with these robins. 100 years ago, they were relatively uncommon in DuPage County. But as DuPage County went from farms to suburban areas, the cornfields became golf courses. The habitat changed, and actually, American robins are probably much more common now than they were even 50 years ago, maybe before that. Well, I talked about comparing birds. This is a thrush, a Swainson's thrush. It's a relative of the robin. It's smaller. It's a lot shyer. You can see it looks sort of nondescript, especially in my photograph, which isn't the sharpest. I was happy just to be able to photograph them because they're very shy and they make sure they're in the understory. But if you look around the eye, you'll see a distinct ring, and that's a good indicator of the Swainson's thrush. It's what we call a field mark. Roger Torrey Peterson, who pretty much started bird watching as a hobby in its present form, is famous for coming up with the system of field marks. What's the one thing you can look at on a plant or animal that will separate it from similar plants and animals? And of course, there were red-winged blackbirds. Here's the male singing everywhere. And those were some of the first birds. I mean, all of the ones I just showed you, quite frankly, are birds I did not see in Florida. I'd have to go maybe 50 or 100 miles further north to see the red-winged blackbird. I misspoke. I do have pied-billed grebes in my lake. They winter where I stay in Florida. But The red-winged blackbird, not so much. This bird, though, is all over the place where I am when I go into Florida, the common grackle. It's larger than the red-winged blackbird. Notice the purple, bluish purple head. The body is kind of greenish. They're called a grackle because that's what they sound like. They real very harsh sound. I remember I had students when I was teaching a class at College of DuPage who thought the common grackle were crows and could not convince them otherwise. But it's a blackbird related to the red-winged blackbird and some of the other blackbirds I'm going to show you later on. Well, here's a bird I see a lot in Florida, although further inland, not along the coast, the great egret. It's a large white bird with yellow bill that, it's a little green face. And again, this was at Lambert Lake. I'm sure if you drive around Woodridge, you will find any number of retention ponds. And I think they're underappreciated. If I were teaching a biology class or field biology class these days, I think for extra credit or maybe as a class project, have students spend a few weeks studying the birds and whatever other animals and plants associated with retention ponds, because we have so many of them in DuPage County. This is our most common heron, or I should say most commonly seen heron. Where I am in Florida, it's not all that common. The great blue heron, very large bird, as you can see. Some bird watchers I know call them flying pterodactyls because they're so big. But you can see they're a wading bird. This one's probably standing in 36 inches of water, stands about 5 or 6 feet tall, and they eat a great deal, almost anything aquatic, anything they can swallow. I've seen video footage of one of these eating a muskrat, and just this week I saw video footage of one eating a small alligator. So very, very successful predators. But there's some little guys too that I saw at Lambert Lake. For example, the white-throated sparrow. There's going to be a similar sparrow coming up in a little bit, but notice the white-throated sparrow has a very distinct white throat, plus it has a very noticeable little yellow, let's call it an eyebrow. You'll usually see them on the ground, scratching, looking for seeds. Their song is sometimes written down as Old Sam Peabody. I have a friend in Canada, and up in Canada, their song is Oh Sweet Canada, but they'll be moving through our area soon. In fact, there are probably a few of them here now. Every once in a while, I see reports of some rare or unusual bird. And so one of the places I went to last spring was West Branch Forest Preserve. Now, the first time I went to West Branch, it was still mostly farm fields. And I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but I broke the law many, many times because it was posted no trespassing. But you can go in off of Army Trail Road. There's a parking lot, a very nice parking lot, walk down to the lake, a very nice trail around the lake. And the first bird I saw on the lake was the common loon. Now, if you've gone up to northern Wisconsin or Minnesota, you've heard the loon. They're famous for their lapping, but there were several of these on the lake, and I was really surprised and delighted to see them. They're very aware of my presence. Stayed in the middle of the lake. I don't know how many times I cut this photograph to get a recognizable image, but you can see the black head, the sharp black bill, the little white ring around the neck. These are related to the grebe I showed you earlier, and they're diving birds. But the birds I really came to see, and these are unusual birds for our area, were the horned grebe and the eared grebe. And this horned grebe is in breeding plumage. The eared grebe is either a juvenile or hasn't gone into breeding plumage yet. But they were on the lake. This is unfortunately the best photograph I was able to take. But this is the point when I say birds have wings and they don't read books. Horned grebes are not unusual here, although they're not common. Ear grebes really are. They're a bird usually that migrates further west, but this one somehow found its way to north central DuPage County. Of course, I was hearing a lot of song sparrows. These are our most common native sparrow in a lot of habitats and areas. A brown bird, you can see a little reddish brown, but their field mark is that kind of stick pin in the middle of its chest, and that's something you want to look for. They like to perch fairly high up in some trees, and they throw their head back to sing. But when I was photographing the grebes previously, I looked on the ground and I happened to see this guy, a savanna sparrow. It's a grassland bird, and they're residents, breeding residents of the county. You'll notice that this one has that yellow eyebrow, but doesn't have the white throat, doesn't have the black and white little cap like the white-crowned sparrow. And there are several areas down by Woodridge where you can expect these, some of the forest preserves. Green Valley would be one, Waterfall Glen would be another, but they're moving in now that the migration's on. A bird that passes through is one of the smallest birds you're going to see in the county, the ruby-crowned kinglet. There's a couple of things I'd like to point out in this photograph to help you identify it. First of all, it's small. You can see it's grayish green. When I say it's smaller than the house sparrow. They have that ruby crown, which shows in this photograph, and I was very pleased to see it because it's not always evident. If you look at the wings, there's a couple white stripes, or we call them wing bars. That helps identify it. And it has a white ring around its eye. So those were, three of the field marks you could use to identify this bird. It's an insect-eating bird. It comes early. It will be here for the next few weeks. Closely related to the ruby-crowned kinglet is the golden-crowned kinglet. It usually comes a bit later in the season, but they overlap. You'll notice that the eye ring is not so distinct on this bird. And instead of a ruby crown, it has this is the female, she has a yellow crown. The male has an orange crown. But when I see a kinglet, what I really look for are those wing bars and that eye ring. And if I see those, I know it's ruby crowned. If I don't see it, I know it's a golden crown. And then over there at the lake at West Branch, the swallows had come back, and the tree swallows. They're called tree swallows because guess where they nest? They nest in holes in trees. And they're a bluish bird. They fly over the water, that very white breast. In most areas, in most of the preserves, I think they're probably the most common swallow. And it's one I think a beginner should get to know and become familiar with. Well, one of the prime birding areas, not just in DuPage County, but in all of northeastern Illinois, is a section of West DuPage Woods called Elson's Hill. It's just a little bit west of Winfield Road and off of Gary's Mill Road. There's oak forest there, there's grassland, you can see there's ponds, there's, you don't see it in this map of the area, but to the north of it, there's the West Branch of the DuPage River. It's just got a lot of diverse habitat. And at once upon a time, It had been a fruit orchard, and some of the fruit trees are still there. It's well known for warblers. I was out today and I didn't take this photograph, but I saw this warbler, the yellow-rumped warbler. It's probably our earliest warbler. People have been seeing them since the middle of March. I've managed to see a few every time I've been out over the last few weeks. You can see the yellow patch here on the side, but the reason they're called yellow butt warblers is that they have a very distinct yellow butt, yellow rump. In fact, birders sometimes call them butterbutts. This is a male in breeding plumage. In the fall, they're a brown bird, but that yellow rump is still there. Another warbler you might see, and I have a better photograph coming up in a few minutes, is the black and white warbler, which is black and white. It explores tree trunks and tree limbs very thoroughly. I won't get into it now, but warblers are fascinating because so many species live in the same habitat, but they use the habitat in many different ways. Some feed high in trees, some feed low in trees, some feed on the ground, some feed on the outer branches, some feed on the inner branches. So they divide the territory up between them. But this was a bird I saw at Elson's Hill. And always out of focus for me, I don't know why the bird never cooperates, is the common yellowthroat. This is one of the few warblers that sticks around and breeds in our area, the marshy areas and fields. This is a male whose colors are a little more intense than the female. He has a black mask and a bright yellow throat. He's olive green on top, and sometimes when I've been out, I've seen a bird fly, and I thought, what kind of sparrow is that? Because it looked brown, and it turned out to be a yellowthroat. Well, this was a bird I heard today, the yellow warbler, and sometimes bird names are a mystery. Not only is this a spring migrant, but this is another bird that will breed in our area. I was at Herrick Lake today, and I heard one singing. I wasn't able to spot it, but its song is "Sweet, sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet," and it is. It is a sweet little bird. And when I say little bird, let's go back to the idea of the house sparrow. It's smaller than the house sparrow. And I have to be honest, I stole this picture from something from the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. I don't have a good photograph myself of yellow warblers. And I stole this photograph too from the same place, a hooded warbler. There's over 20 species, maybe 30 species of warblers that pass through DuPage County. And getting a good clear view of one is always a triumph. And photographing them, I marvel at people who take photographs like this. But for a lot of experienced birders, these are the birds they want to see. In fact, I know plenty of people who will only bird in the spring because they want to see birds like this. But a bird I happen to like is a relative of the cardinal. It's the rose-breasted grosbeak. This is a male, again, in spring plumage, slightly bigger than a robin. His song sounds a lot like a robin. In fact, a lot of bird books will tell you its song is like a robin's if a robin had voice lessons. And beautiful bird. The female looks like a big sparrow, and I have not managed to photograph one. So here's a scarlet tanager. And you're saying, wait a minute, John, I thought scarlet tanagers were scarlet. Well, this is a male scarlet tanager, but I took the picture of it at Lambert Lake in the fall. And this is what the female looks like, and this is what a male looks like in non-breeding plumage. And I know it was a male because in other photographs you can see the wings and the tail are very black. But at Elson's Hill one spring, I saw this guy. This is a male scarlet tanager in breeding plumage. It sounds a lot like robin too. It's a little smaller than the robin. Um, I guess if the rose-breasted grosbeak is sounds like a robin with voice lessons, scarlet tanager sounds like a robin who forgot to sing or has a sore throat. But both the rose-breasted grosbeak and the scarlet tanager, I would associate with open oak woodlands. And you may have had these at your bird feeders. The white-breasted nuthatch, it's a year-round resident, gray, white cheek, black cap. You can see it on tree trunks. They're famous because they often head first down a tree trunk. Their song, if you want to call it that, it's really more of a call, is yank, 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 yank. And you can see them, again, at your bird feeders or any woodland, especially if it's an oak hickory woodland. And let's not forget another duck, the wood duck. This is a male. I saw several of these today when I was out. They're called wood ducks because they nest in tree holes. And every once in a while, I'll see someone post a photograph of someone saying, I saw a duck in a tree. Isn't that unusual? Well, it is unusual, except for wood ducks. In Lambert Lake, where I go birding, over the years, there's somebody in the community, and I haven't met the person, who builds nest boxes for wood ducks and puts them up in the trees. Well, my wife's not a birder, but she went with me to Mallard Lake. And again, this is another forest reserve I went to when it was still mostly farms and I ignored no trespassing signs. You'll see across County Farm Road from Mallard Lake is Hawk Hollow, which I would love to go birding at someday. There's a trail there, but there are no good parking places. So you kind of have to park along the side of the road and whatever. Mallard Lake is one of the lakes that, again, they're man-made. They were quarry lakes. They filled up with water. The preserve itself is used a lot by bikers and joggers, and fishermen go there because they stock it with, I guess, pike. But it does have some good birds. For example, one of the first birds I saw when we got out of our car, started walking around, were some more loons. But then I saw a bird, I photographed it, that's not too exciting to a lot of birders, but I think beginning birders need to get to know this one. It's the brown-headed cowbird. This is the male. The female has the same body and shape, and she's just a very nondescript gray, perhaps the plainest bird I can think of. Cowbirds are notorious because they lay an egg or two in other birds' nests and are called nest parasites for that reason. They'll lay the egg and just fly away, and some other bird will, the other bird will hatch the egg and raise the young. But it's actually a survival technique for the cowbird. Originally, they were associated with herds of bison, and the buffalo would move around, and the cowbirds fed largely on the insects that were stirred up. So they couldn't easily raise their young in a nest if they're following herds of buffalo. So that's how the survival technique developed. But it's a good bird to get to know. This is a great bird to see, a Caspian tern. It might look like a gull, and it's related to gulls, but notice it's much whiter when you see it flying. It has that black cap, and it has a really red bill. In Florida, along the Gulf Coast at least, there's a similar bird called the royal tern. Its bill is orange, and it's a smaller bird. They're very easy to tell apart side by side, and I've learned that at least when I'm down in Florida, the royal tern doesn't have this nice black cap. It has kind of sometimes it's almost white. Well, there's actually 3 forest preserves in this picture. I want to talk about one, uh, but to point out the other two. In the lower right-hand corner, you're going to see Herrick Lake uh, Forest Preserve. That's where I was today. Um, and talk a little bit more about that later. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see Blackwell Forest Preserve, Silver Lake, all those lakes there. That lake was man-made. In fact, you'll see it says a campground and all that sort of thing. This was originally going to be a pay-to-enter forest preserve with a lot of recreation. They found out, though, that there's a mountain there made out of trash, and what was going to be the only swimming lake in DuPage County was polluted. So that's closed. And now, like all the preserves in DuPage County, it's open to the public from sunrise to about an hour after sunset. But I want to talk about the one in the center, St. James Farm Forest Preserve. A lot of the land that was open land around it over the last couple of years has been turned into subdivisions. But originally, St. James Farm belonged to a nephew of Colonel McCormick. Cantigny is just to the north of Mack Road here. You can see some of the green. And it's a horse farm, and it's a nice place to visit if you have visitors. But if you want to walk around and see birds, it has a lot to offer. Now, I talked about looking up. Well, when I was there last April, I happened to look up in the sky and I saw these birds. These are white pelicans. And people are always surprised that we have pelicans in DuPage County. Well, they migrate through. And now is a good time. For the next few weeks, you might see them migrating through. In fact, they're actually kind of towards the end of their migration through our area. I've seen 1 or 2 as late as June, but that's very rare. But again, you look up, you see things. Or you look down and very closely, you can see these little guys, brown creepers. You can see it's very brown. It looks very much like the tree bark, has that very long, thin bill, and they go up trees, circling them usually, probing for insects and insect eggs. They're here for a long time. Sometimes they even overwinter here, but April, beginning of May are usually good times to see them. There are also these birds, the eastern phoebe. And if you want to get confused by birds, in your bird guide, look at pictures of flycatchers, and you'll see phoebes and peewees, least alder. There's all kinds of flycatchers, and they all generally look like this, with subtle differences in color and markings. This one has a couple of wing bars. It also wagged its tail, which is a field mark, and it's saying Phoebe, Phoebe, which is where it gets its name. Well, I'm going to jump ahead now. This is May, and every May, the second weekend in Saturday in May, this year it's May 8th, nationwide, there's a bird count. Here in Illinois, it's supported by the Department of Natural Resources. And I go to a cemetery during the bird counts, one of the areas I look at. And I saw this bird, the white crowned sparrow. You'll notice it looks a little bit like the white-throated sparrow I showed you earlier. It has a very distinct white crown, though. It has that black line through its eyebrow, and it doesn't have that white throat. The species is a little more common to the west, but they're here in the east and the Midwest, and they're always a nice bird to see. But at St. James, I included that photograph here because I saw them at St. James Farm, even though I wasn't able to photograph them. I did see another black and white warbler. This is a pretty good indication of what one looks like. If you see a warbler or a bird like that looks like this, small, streaked black and white, but instead of it has a very distinct black cap and throat and kind of white around the eye and the cheeks, that would be a black pole warbler. I do not have a photograph of one of those to show you. I could probably be here for an hour showing you photographs of palm warblers. They happen to winter in the area where we stay in Florida. They got their name because the first one collected by a scientist was apparently shot out of a palm tree. But these are almost backyard birds for me. I sit out in the mornings down in Florida and watch them literally outside the screen of my lanai, and they often fly up on the screen to pick off insects. They are one of the earlier warblers. They're coming through now, and you're going to be able, you should be on the lookout. They're a ground-dwelling warbler, and for a warbler, they'll let you get pretty close, and they're not as shy or some of the other ones. Well, I showed you the phoebe, which is part of a group of flycatchers that are really hard to tell apart. Maybe that's why I like eastern kingbirds the way I do. They're a flycatcher too, but you can see a very distinct plumage, gray on top, white underneath, that white tail tip, slightly smaller than a robin. They're called kingbirds because they are afraid of nothing. You'll see them going after blackbirds. You'll see them going after hawks. They tend to live in open areas, shrubby fields, and they should be, if you start keeping a list of the birds you see, I would expect you to be able to find one of these before the end of the year. Well, you get close to home, you start seeing things. So I, was getting towards the end of spring, and I was spending a lot more time watching things in my backyard, sitting, and I live literally, I don't live in an area close to a forest preserve. Live just in a very residential area. I could walk to the train in Glen Ellen. I could walk to Roosevelt Road. But I have some spruce trees in my backyard. And every spring, the house finches start singing. This is a male house finch. You can see kind of bright. This one's a little more red than most of them. They're usually a little more purple in hue. They're kind of an interesting bird because they're native to the American West and Southwest. But I think it was 1920s or 30s, if I remember the story, a pet dealer in New York City had a bunch of the birds trapped in California, and he was selling them in his pet store in New York City until he found out he was breaking the law, so he let them all go. And that small group of birds has bred and bred and bred. So now they're found pretty much everywhere in the east and north, let's say the northeastern United States, Chicago region down to over to the Atlantic coast, maybe northern Alabama, Mississippi. What's interesting though, and they've spread the west, obviously. What's interesting is that the native population in the west and southwest has started spreading east, and the two populations sooner or later are going to meet up, probably in St. Louis or Kansas City. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they do. Same species of bird, but originating from two different sources. Well, another bird you're going to see at your feeder, and you can see in the field, is this one, the American goldfinch. This is a male. Again, it's at my feeder. You can see it. They're called wild canaries by some people. That's what my grandfather called them. The male in breeding plumage is, bright yellow, has black wings, black tail, a black cap. Flying through the air, they go up and down. It's called a roller coaster. The females and the males not in breeding plumage have the same general pattern, but they're kind of a yellowish green, not this bright yellow. Well, I was back in my backyard and I had my old friend, the American robin. And that's how I spent a good part of the months of, say, end of July, August, and September, watching the bird bath and watching my bird feeders and watching birds. I wasn't trying to get a big list. I was just watching what came, when and where, and how they behaved. For example, the house sparrow, here's a female with an immature one, came to the bird bath. It's interesting, the sparrows will drink the water, but they don't actually go in it. And I know this is an immature sparrow, the one on the left, because if you look at the base of its bill, it's still a little bit yellow, and it's begging its mother to feed it. Any of you who have millennials living at home know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I make it a point to put out hummingbird feeders, and I get ruby-throated hummingbirds. They're going to be, some have been reported in our area already. I'm going to wait another couple weeks before I put my feeders out. But here's a male ruby-throated hummingbird coming to the feeder, and you can see that bright red throat of his. They're our smallest bird. Probably the only hummingbird you can expect to see in our area. Some of the hummingbirds are actually the largest group of birds in the Western Hemisphere, but they're pretty much tropical. The Southwest is where you're going to see the most species, but they're very people like seeing hummingbirds. This was one I was able to kind of approach as it landed in my redbud tree. You notice I say female with a question mark. Well, that's because the red throat, it's called a gorget, isn't always displayed. The male depends on light, depends on the male's mood. So I thought for years all I had were females until I started, really watching how the birds were behaving. And I've watched birds go from white like this to red and then back to white again. But this is possibly a female. McKee Marsh is actually a section of Blackwell that I showed you about before. But if you want to have a really good day of birding and you want to spend about 4 hours in the field, I would strongly recommend visiting McKee Marsh. It has a variety of habitats. It takes me, incidentally, about 4 hours to walk around on the trail. There are a couple observation platforms, and also kind of a blind to look at the marsh. Over the years, some birds that are very rare in DuPage County have been found here. Sandhill cranes have actually nested here rarely. One year we had a western blackbird called the yellow-headed blackbird. Guess what? It's a blackbird with a yellow head. We're nesting here. They haven't been there for quite a few years now, but it's well worth the trip. I actually had a friend who's moved out of the area, but for a period of, I think, about 3 years, he would walk around the marsh, walk this trail in the morning, looking for birds. And I used to joke that he was on a first name basis with most of the birds, but it was wonderful. I mean, I forget how many species he found, but this is one of the most productive areas and perhaps one of the best areas to visit for birds. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see something that says Crest Creek Farms Park. This is owned by the West Chicago Park District, and it's there's some playing fields there, but most of it's a big grassy area. went out there. I was helping a young man survey birds for the park district, and several nesting species of birds that are relatively rare in our area are found there. Birds called bobolinks, meadowlarks, uh, some very uncommon sparrows are found there. But if you don't mind the drive, this is a very good place to go. Closer to Woodridge, there's Green Valley Forest Preserve. Some of you, if you have sons in the Scouts, may have been there. It's a very diverse area, and there's several places to park. I usually park in the main parking lot on Green Road, cross Green Road, and walk the trails down to that body of water, that pond, over by 83rd Street. We call it a fuddle because it fills up in the spring and early summer and evaporates. So by fall, you're going to find a lot of shorebirds there. But the forest preserve has everything a good forest preserve should have. It has mixed habitat. You can see it has very good trails. Actually, the DuPage Birding Club, for years during the fall hawk migration, has a daily hawk watch that you can go to the club's website, find out more about, and perhaps participate in if you like. Another forest preserve that shows up on this screen that's worth visiting, although it's sort of a challenge to park, is the Egerman Woods County Forest Preserve in the far upper left-hand corner. You have to kind of go on College and get into the subdivision there and find a place to park. But it's a woodland area, moist woodland. Last time I was there, I saw a horned owl, great horned owl, with a couple of young sitting on a tree. And of course, that was the day I didn't have my camera with me. So well, I had a small camera. The picture's not all that good, but that's a good place to go. And in the lower right-hand corner is a preserve I'm going to talk about, Oldfield Oaks. So here's Oldfield Oaks. It's off Lamont Road. And I found it by accident. I've been to most, but not all of the preserves in the county, but this is one I'd overlooked for many years. I was surprised the day I went there. There were a lot of people. It was during lunch hour. There were a lot of people in the parking lot, but I was able to find a place to park, and I walked the trail. It goes through a lot of diverse habitat. There's a marsh that doesn't quite show up here. And you could probably walk this trail in an hour or less, hour and a half, and go through many kinds of habitat and see many, many kinds of birds. So this spring, be a good place to explore. Well, just to the north of you in Downers Grove is one of the most remarkable and probably underbirded areas in the county, Belmont Prairie. It's owned jointly by the Downers Grove Park District and by the DuPage County Forest Preserve District. What makes it so unique is that area on the right-hand side of the map where it says prairie. This was considered to be virgin prairie by botanists from Morton Arboretum and some of the universities in the state. At the time DuPage County was first settled, say in the late 1830s, early 1840s, slightly less than half of the county was prairie. Most of the prairies now that you see, whether it's at the Morton Arboretum or College of DuPage or wherever, those prairies were restored prairies. Literally, the one at College of DuPage that I'm most familiar with had been a gravel parking lot until one of the professors there, Kurt Russell, started working to restore it. But Belmont Prairie is a wonderful spot to see not only grassland birds, but also to watch, to look for various kinds of prairie plants. There's some I understand in the prairie section. Probably they're not along the trail, quite frankly, but there are some plants there that are very rare in the state. That's why it's called a nature preserve. The rules governing it are a little bit different from a forest preserve. Well, I know the library has a lot of resources, and I'm sure George or one of the other librarians will help you find them. But I want to talk a little bit about some things that are online that I think are good resources. First of all, Cornell University has its laboratory of ornithology. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, facility of its type in the country. It's very active with all aspects of bird study. And one of the things you can do, you can go there, and if you look next to the little search, you'll see something that says all about birds. If you click on that, you can start looking for different kinds of birds. Here's a great egret. I'm looking at the alligator. I'm thinking this is Florida, but you can see it gives you lots of photographs. It gives you the vocalizations. It has information about how to identify it. The Lab of Ornithology, incidentally, has a library of bird sounds. And Arthur Allen, who founded the library, the lab decades ago, was probably the first person to do a very systematic study of bird sounds and to systematically record bird songs. Another thing about the lab is something called eBird. Now you have to create an account. It's free, although like most things that are free, they'll start asking you for money sooner or later. But you can put down, you keep your bird list on it. For example, this is one from, I guess, the bird count last May. So I was able to put down the number of each species I saw. I bothered to put down the ages and the sex of the bird, if I could tell what it was. And you'd be surprised. I think at this point I have a couple thousand bird checklist in there. Lambert Lake actually is the one I have the most for, I think. No, my yard is the one I have a lot for my yard, but Lambert Lake is one of the largest ones. But again, the Laboratory of Ornithology at Cornell University, great resource and fun to explore. A place that I just started going to is iNaturalist, inaturalist.org. Again, you do have to create an account and you do have to, they're going to ask you for money. But what it does is if you take photographs of something, you can upload the photograph and enter some information, and the information generates maps like this. So we were looking at great egret. Here's a map of where great egrets have been seen all around the world. You can see North America, Europe, South America, Australia, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa. And you can go to individual species accounts or your own records. This is one for a red-winged blackbird. And this happens to be a female red-winged blackbird. I can look at the map. It looks like I probably saw this bird at Hidden Lake Forest Preserve here in Downers Grove, Glen Ellen, Lyle. And, scientists really do use this because there's literally thousands, tens of thousands of observations for all kinds of animals. So if you want some more information, I talked about eBird, talked about iNaturalist. You go to the DuPage Birding Club's page, dupagebirding.org. You'll find a lot of things that will help you with local information. I know that we have some members who are actually now working on creating kind of a bird list or photographs of birds from the county. We have a bird checklist there that you can download and print if you want it. But there's lots more there, lots more. I personally have written some things about attracting birds and feeding birds, and a lot of resources there for people. We're also on Facebook. Some of the things the club's doing, some of the things related groups are doing. I'm going to give myself a shout out here. I'm on Facebook with something called John's Natural DuPage. I'm not quite as restricted in what I say and do there as I am with the Bird Club's Facebook page. And I cover more things than birds. So it's, you know, if you're welcome to go and look at that, comment on the photographs and the things I post. But I want you to remember this, that bird watching keeps you sharp, gives you a purpose in nature, helps you think and unwind, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to encourage you to get out and do some bird watching. Now's a great time. From now, the next 6-8 weeks, probably one of the best times to watch birds. So I'm going to, let's see, it says stop share. So George, I'm going to go back and get rid of this screen somehow. If I can find my, how do I do this? Maybe escape. There we go.
There you go. Yeah, excellent presentation, John. And I'd like to open it up now to questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
You know, we're using Zoom and we have the Q&A feature. It looks like we have 2 questions already. If anyone else has any questions, just click on Q&A and go ahead and type in your question. And both John and I can see the questions, and John will respond. For example, John, Nancy asks, where do you park for McKees Marsh?
For McKees Marsh, okay, here I see it. For McKees Marsh, Nancy, there's a parking lot right off of Mack Road. So, and it's, I've seen it with a lot of cars. I've never seen it fill, but it's the good place to park there, and you shouldn't have any problem. There's also washrooms and it's nice. It's got some facilities. So I see someone asking, have you birded at the Tallgrass Prairie? As a matter of fact, I have, and that was good. There was a bird called a dick sissel. I have some of my best photographs of dick sissels, which are related to, are related to robins, not robins, cardinals and grosbeaks I took there. I saw mockingbirds there, which are a southern bird, but you know, I'm discovering that South Will County starts to get a whole lot more like in some of those other areas when you get a little south here, get a whole lot more like southern, let's say Kentucky, Tennessee than one might imagine. So that was a good place to bird. Lot of sites there, and in fact, one of the things that I will say, it's run by the Department of Agriculture, which I thought was interesting. I hadn't realized that, and they have an interpretive center. Across the street, which is Route 53, there seemed to be a nesting colony of those great egrets, and some not close to the road. I didn't want to cross Route 53 to get closer, and it looked like I'd have to do some real bushwhacking to get up close. But it's a great place to go. My camera equipment, someone is asking. I have a Nikon. I actually have 2 Nikons. One I keep here, and because I didn't want to travel with one, I bought a smaller one that I keep in Florida. But generally, I have a zoom lens on it, and I shoot most of my photographs with autofocus, and at 300 millimeters. And then, you know, if I enlarge it, it's because I'm editing it and I'm cropping it here in the with the software on the computer. How do you tell a female robin from a male robin? I was just thinking, my niece is named Robin, and I had a student, a male student, a football player named Robin. The females are generally a little duller in color. So that's the easiest way. I was surprised though, when we came back a few weeks ago, that the females were already here. I didn't expect females back this early. Someone's asking about birds that seem to be chasing hawks or falcons. A lot of birds do that. The kingbird, of course, does it a lot, but I've seen red-winged blackbirds do it. I've seen crows do it. Another behavior you might see sometimes are crows do something called mobbing. If they find an owl out in the open, they'll surround it. And sometimes you'll see 50, 100 crows just, kind of harassing the owl, which just kind of sits there and blinks and ignores them. But there's a lot of birds that chase hawks. Like I said, the most common bird around here to do that is probably the red-winged blackbird, but kingbirds do it too. Laura's asking about a bird walking around Lake Carlton. That's probably, look at it, if it has a white breast and 2 black lines, that's a killdeer. And it's called a killdeer because that's what its call is like. They nest in this area. They're kind of famous because if you get too close to a nest or young, one of the adults will kind of come out in front of you and appear to have a broken wing in an attempt to kind of lure you away. So that's the most common one we have around here. We do have a variety of sandpipers and other plovers come into this area, but the killdeer is far and away the most common. So I'm assuming the bird, I would describe it about maybe the size of a robin, a little longer legs. And yeah, they're here now. I've heard them. I haven't gotten any good views of them the last few weeks, but I've heard them. Okay, I've already answered the camera. I use a Nikon, digital Nikon with a 300mm lens going. Olivia's asking about Lyman Woods. I wasn't there last year. I've been there a lot. In fact, when I talked about Belmont Prairie, once upon a time, there was a very active chapter of the Illinois Audubon Society, which at the time was headquartered in Downers Grove. And they were very, very active in preserving Lyman Woods. But yes, I've gone there. And you're right, Olivia, it's a very good spot to bird. The last few times I was there was a kind of a bridge or boardwalk that had fallen in disrepair. And I know the Park District was asking you not to cross it. So I should try making a point going back in the next few weeks. It was a good spot to go. It had great wildflowers too. And if memory serves, it had a colony of black gray squirrels. Looked like a heron, a small heron. Well, we have several small herons in this area. What I would consider, if it's brownish and green, that would be the green heron. We also have the black crowned night heron. Excuse me. The adults in breeding plumage are the same. They're kind of white underneath and black on top. And very, very, very rarely we'll have a yellow crowned night heron, which is gray with a yellow top knot. A bird that's probably more common in this area, but very rarely seen because it's so well camouflaged, is called the American bittern. It's a heron. It's brown, it's streaked, and it's notorious for sitting in the marsh with its head up in the air, so it looks just like the cattails. The orange cardinal, it's probably a cardinal. Well, if you think it's a cardinal and looks like it's orange, it's either a female, or cardinals get their red from what they eat. So if they're not getting enough carotene in their diet, they'll be kind of bleached out and pale looking. So I would say it's probably a true calendar. Glenn, you're asking about what looked like geese. I would not be surprised if they were the sandhill cranes I talked about. They fly at sandhills can actually fly quite. All cranes actually can fly quite high, and it's not unusual for them to be going along, and sometime in a real V formation, and then sort of circle or break up and circle. In fact, to tell you the truth, Glenn, I think I've probably seen more sandhill cranes flying in V formations than I've seen geese. How do you attract bluebirds? Play BB King records? No, that's not the answer. Bubba, it depends where you are. I'm afraid most of our suburban area is not conducive to bluebirds. But if you go to many forest preserves, you'll see that the Forest Preserve District puts up bluebird boxes. And bluebirds like open habitat or edge habitat. By edge habitat, I mean there's shrubs and trees. Bluebirds have had a hard time of it because a couple introduced birds, starlings and house sparrows, compete for the nest boxes. Also, a lot of native birds do that. I was at Lincoln Marsh in Wheaton last year, and I watched a pair of chickadees drive out a pair of bluebirds from a nest box. Another bird that will outcompete bluebirds for nest boxes is the tree swallow. What you'll find in the forest preserves, though, and I thought this was really clever when it was explained to me, what the forest preserve has learned to do is to put up 2 or 3 bluebird boxes, nest boxes in close proximity. And what generally happens is that a tree swallow will nest in one of them right away. And the tree swallows are very territorial when it comes to nesting. So they'll drive away other tree swallows, and then the bluebirds can nest in the nest box. There are whole organizations dedicated to restoring bluebirds. And if you drive sometimes in the country, you'll see bluebird boxes, nest boxes put up on fence posts every few 100 yards or so. I'm thinking for a minute here, Glenn, Bubba. The only time I think I've actually seen a bluebird in a nest box in a suburban area was, in fact, last spring during the bird count. There's a very low-lying area here in Glenella and close to the elementary school my kids went to. The kids called it the bog. And a few years ago, people were concerned because coyotes were in the area, and they were using the bog as the kind of their denning area. And then, of course, there were some concerns that some homeless people were camping in the bog, and the neighbors didn't want that. So they cleared it up, and they're trying to restore it. And a Boy Scout has put up some bluebird boxes, and I did see a bluebird around one of the bluebird boxes last year. This was just off of Illinois Avenue here in Glen Ellen, which is just a little bit north of Roosevelt Road. But that is the most urban area I've ever seen bluebird boxes in. There are bluebird boxes at Lincoln Marsh, which is one of the few places I've seen house sparrows not close to people's houses. and they were using some of those boxes, but the bluebirds are using it too. If you're interested in tracking bluebirds, I know there's lots and lots of information online. I have never had one in my yard. So, and I've seen well over 100 species of birds in my yard, or from my yard, and the bluebird has been one of them. So, you need land, you need the grassland, you need to put the houses up. But thank you for the question. Laura's asking about owls. Yes, the snowy owl is only here for a short period of time. Long-eared owls are usually here about the same time, and short-eared owls are here about the same time. Short-eared owls are usually spotted in large open areas. They spot them at Springbrook Prairie. They spot them at the Fermilab. I didn't mention Fermilab as a place to go to, incidentally. It's a great spot to go birding. Unfortunately, since the pandemic, it's closed down. And since 9/11, it's a little more restrictive. Otherwise, the most common owl in our area, the commonly seen owl, is the great horned owl, and they're year-round. You have screech owls that are year-round. They're a little harder to see, although I've heard them at night here in Glen Ellen. In marshy areas, such as at Waterfall Glen around Argonne, and places inside the Morton Arboretum, there are barred owls. Let me think. Those are the screech, the great horned owl, the screech owl, and the barred owl are the most common. Barn owls used to be found here. They used to be common. They're very rare now. They're as rare as barns. And quite honestly, they're one of the birds that if someone sees one, they'll report seeing one, but they don't report where they see it usually, because they don't want mobs of birders coming to disturb it. So George, I think I've answered. I don't see any more questions.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. That was excellent. Those are all the questions. We really do appreciate you coming in this evening and presenting. I should add to everyone in the audience that you'll be back again next month to talk about gardening to attract birds and butterflies.
Yeah, that's I'm playing with that program. I've done it for years. I'm adapting it. A lot of people stop feeding the birds in the summertime, but I have a few things to say about that. And I think people, if you want to attract birds to your yard and butterflies, I have a few things to say that you might find useful in your own attempts. So, well, George, I really appreciate this. I'm really, and I know the Bird Club does too. And
sure.
if people are interested, I urge you to go to the DuPage Birding Club site, and you'll find there's a lot of people there who can answer your questions. We each have our own little niche, and the more people who watch birds, the better. One of the things, in my lifetime, last 50 years, scientists at Cornell estimate that North America has lost 1/3 of its breeding birds for various reasons. And the more people get interested in the birds, the more people who understand why birds, like other forms of wildlife, are important to not only environmental health in an abstract sense, but in a real sense, our own health and well-being, the better it is. So, I urge everybody to go out there and do a little bird watching.